It's no secret that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the way people work today. Now in 2024, it's feeling like we're officially getting out of the pandemic, and as things slowly return back to normal, one of the things that's changing is how people work. More and more, we're hearing about major industries and major corporations calling for a return to office, or as LinkedIn puts it, RTO initiatives. Really being that return to being in the office 5 days a week. I mean, this is coming out of JP Morgan, Amazon, and Chipotle. Meanwhile, there's another group of people that work hybrid, only going into the office a set amount of days a week or a set amount of days a month, working remotely when they're not on site. And then you have the people who work fully remote. These are the people who call their home the office. What it feels like is these three work modes are jockeying for position. Which one is going to win out when it's all said and done? But there's a fourth option that people seem to forget about, at least here in the United States, and that is the 4-day work week. Working Monday through Thursday, with Friday, Saturday, and Sunday being the new weekend. I mean, there's been a ton of talk about this form of working coming out of Europe. Studies have shown that, at least in Europe, productivity goes up and employee health goes up at companies that have the 4-day work week. But is it as good as it sounds? Luckily for us, we have a design agency here in the US that has tested out the 4-day work week. Swim Creative is an agency out of Duluth, Minnesota, and they've operated on the 4-day work week the past 2 summers. I was fortunate to have a conversation with Swim's partner and brand director, David Sadowski, to learn more about the 4-day work week in practice and its impact on the business. And what he said about the 4-day work week really it surprised me. But before we get into that, be sure to support the show by giving it a like, leaving a comment, and of course by following the show. I'm Ziggy the Designer. Design is all around us, so we might as well talk about it. So let's get into it. If you don't know Swim Creative, they are a design agency based in Duluth, Minnesota, here in the United States. Duluth is, one of the most northern cities in the country. I actually went to college in Duluth, and it is a gorgeous city, but wow, can it get cold. Swim, I would say, is the leader in that northern Minnesota, even northern Midwest region of the United States. We're talking about Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. They do a ton of great work in branding, web design, and marketing. I've been in love with their brand work for Lake Superior Zoo for a long time. They are truly the agency to catch up to in that region of the U.S. So then what led them to implementing the 4-day work week these past 2 summers? I spoke with Swim's partner and brand director David Sadowski over email to learn more about the 4-day work week in practice at Swim and how it impacted the business at Swim. David is an industry veteran, having spent years working as a designer and art director at agencies specializing in luxury goods to branding before starting his time with Swim Creative back in 2011. It was in 2012 when he became a partner and brand director at the agency. So I started the conversation by asking David what inspired the agency to implement the 4-day work week, and his response gives us 2 reasons here. He said, "Our decision was inspired by our short summers. Living in Duluth, we try to enjoy our warm days as much as possible, so we wanted to provide a benefit to our staff to have an extra day off to spend with family and friends. We were also inspired by the fact that we historically saw that our workload decreases during the summer months. Our busy periods have always been in spring and autumn." And I agree. And I spent 4 years in Duluth, and David is absolutely right. Warm days don't come by too often up there, so it's best to make the most of them. But he also makes a point that summers for the business are slower. Business-wise, how can you log hours when you don't have hours to log? So they had a little bit of room to experiment there, for the 4-day work week. So the 4-day work week is in full swing for the summer at Swim. I asked David, how have your employees and clients responded to the 4-day work week? What changes have you seen in productivity, morale, or overall well-being? And this is the part that surprised me. David said, "The most surprising thing I found is that most people took that extra day and used it as a day to focus on projects we had. We didn't ask people to." And that's something that he really noted, that the agency didn't ask people to take that Friday. to work, right? This was on the employees. This was a decision that they made with their time. David continues by saying, I personally started working on Friday just to catch up on work. Then I noticed that other people were on Slack communicating. I asked why people are working on a day off, and they all had the same thought to use it as a day with no meetings so they could focus on doing their best work. When people do take the full 3 days, they feel more refreshed come Monday morning. They are able to experience life for a while longer, which is important because much of our job is being out in the world and experiencing it, then taking those experiences and use it in the work we do. So what surprised me about this answer is that you'd expect people to take that extra day, that Friday, to spend time away from work. I mean, it's a 4-day work week, right? I mean, why not? So to hear that people are using it as more of a focus day or as a hybrid flex day, it's really interesting. It goes against what we hear coming out of the examples from Europe, where those employees are actually taking that Friday to spend time away from work. So how did this 4-day work week impact Swim's bottom line? How did it impact the business? I asked David, what changes have you seen in Swim's business metrics, such as revenue, client retention, or project turnaround times? And again, the first part of the answer here surprised me. David began by saying that, as far as revenue, we didn't see much of a change. Revenue loss is one of the biggest counter-arguments, at least here in the US, when it comes to the 4-day work week. I mean, you're losing a day of production, you're losing a day of work, you're losing a day of making money. I mean, it makes sense. He then talked about the trials and tribulations that came in 2023 when they tried the 4-day work week for the first time. David says, this is the second summer we tried this, and we learned a lot in the first year. We did see a couple deadlines get missed, and we had a time when the client called on a Friday with a problem, and the people who were in charge were in a place where they didn't have cell coverage. And yes, we ended up losing that client. So this year, we implemented a plan where half the team was on call on Fridays just in case something comes up. That seemed to work well. Something to keep in mind, sometimes we did have to work on Friday for video or photo shoots. We knew that going in, we had to be flexible with schedules and weather in order to make it work. And this is pretty much in line with everything else I'm hearing from agency owners and agency directors. Ultimately, design is a service-based industry. We have to meet our clients where they're at. And if they're working 5 days a week, so are we. So now that summer is over and Swim is back to their 5-day work week, I asked David, do you foresee the 4-day work week becoming more common in the US? What changes or trends do you think are needed to drive its adoption? And his response, honestly, I don't see it as something that will become more common anytime soon. We are still getting used to calling a 40-hour work week work-life balance. I have heard of variations of this model. Some will do 10 hours a day for 4 days a week. I've also heard of having alternating Fridays off. Bottom line, you have to do what is best for your company. So what does this mean for the way we work? I mean, is the 4-day work week a viable option? Well, here's what I think. I think that we will get there eventually. Ultimately, the 4-day work week requires a major shift in the way we think about work culture here in the US. And as designers, we don't really have much control or say over that just yet. I mean, design, as we said earlier, is a service-based industry, and until our clients shift to a 4-day work week, we still have to meet them where they're at. David demonstrated this in the interview by telling the story of how they lost the client because they couldn't meet on a Friday. And looking client side, they're just starting to scratch the surface on what a healthy work-life balance looks like. I mean, look at what happened at Bank of America about a month ago. It took an employee dying of being overworked for the finance industry to finally address their culture around 80 to 100-hour work weeks. But the fact that these conversations are happening is a great sign. It means the ball is rolling. Something that David mentioned in our interview was, and I'll quote him here, "When I started my career, I was working 50 to 60 hours a week. That was normal. Only recently have people been trying to keep work to 40 hours. And so what David has seen is progress in developing what a work-life balance schedule looks like. But I mean, we still have some of that old school way of thinking, those 50 to 60 hour work weeks. We still have that way of thinking in the design industry. One of my first jobs out of college was at an agency run by former Leo Burnett directors and executives. And working there weren't really 40-hour work weeks. It wasn't so much a 9 to 5, but a 9 to whenever the job is done. And that could be 6 p.m. or 11 p.m. And if you work in advertising, that's just how they do things over there. So you got to think about, if agencies are still being run like this, then there's still much work to do if we want to get that 4-day work week to happen. So as it stands today with the 4-day work week, it's just not ready yet. Which form of work do you prefer? Are you full return to office 5 days a week? Do you love hybrid work? Or do you live to work fully remote? Or are you even a proponent of the 4-day work week? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's all I have for you today. Be sure to like, follow, and share. I've been Ziggy the Designer. If there are 2 things you need to know about me, it's that 1, I love design. And 2, I'm very opinionated. I'll talk with y'all later. Bye-bye.